Jeff, welcome to the show, mate. It's good to finally get you on. We speak regularly anyway, but it's great to finally get you on as a guest, mate.
Thanks, Andy. I really appreciate it. Honestly, I've been a big fan of informed performance for a while now. And like you said, we speak regularly. So when you reached out and asked me to hop on the pod, was really excited to do it. So excited for the conversation we're going to have here today.
Cool, likewise. As is tradition, we always kind of start with people's background. Can you just walk us through career beginnings and kind of bring us up to speed now so we've got context on you?
Of course. So as the founder and CEO of Move Lab in Los Angeles, the beginning of my story started out at Bethel University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I did my undergrad there in athletic training, sports medicine, got my ATC. I did a short stint with the Vikings, at which point I found out about Chris Powers out at USC, just through some work that I did with Adrian Peterson after his ACL surgery. And his return to sport was so quick and pronounced that I was really curious about who the sports medicine staff had been consulting with in order to accelerate his rehab like that. So Chris's name came up, I did a little bit of research, and the rest is history. So the next year I was out at USC, I did my doctorate there at the Division of Biokinesiology and PT. And then I did my fellowship with Chris in biomechanics shortly thereafter and launched my private practice. So that brings us to today. And essentially Move Lab operates at the intersection of sports science, athletic rehab, and elite human performance. And so I really wanted to bring the high-level sports science technologies as well as objective data use that I saw when I was with the Vikings to a setting that services both professional athletes and the general population, working professional elite athlete. And so that is kind of my journey to where we are today.
Tell me about, I know a little bit anyway, but tell our listeners even is a better way to phrase it. Tell us about kind of what Move Lab does in terms of like core, not core products, but like core services. What are the things that you do there for athletes or for teams?
Course. So the way that I like to break it down is we have three primary verticals. The first is our sports science, and that is the foundational vertical for the other two, which are elite performance rehab and then human performance training. And sports science itself also encompasses any like testing modalities, whether it's biomechanics, VO2 max, cardiometabolic testing, EMG electromyography testing, or technology-based objective data collection. It also encompasses a research arm. We do private industry research as well as contributing to clinical literature on injury risk assessment, rehabilitation, and human performance. So within the umbrella of those three verticals, we use objective data in order to sharpen our approach to injury risk assessment, rehabilitation, like post-operative and return to sport assessment. And then on our human performance side, for healthy athletes looking to find that peak performance edge, we really leverage objective data to sharpen our clinical skills and our expertise in order to drive actionable outcomes for those athletes.
Cool. I'm sure you get, with those different verticals, I'm sure you get different sort of typical patients or typical clients. How does that kind of play out? Like, what are the sort of like the main services that you're providing, or are people with you for a long time, or are they tending to drop in for more assessment-based things? How does that kind of play out for you?
That's a really good question. I would say that we have a pretty good mix of repeat clients as well as like one-off consulting projects. The majority, I would say, come to us on a word-of-mouth basis. We don't do a lot of advertising, but we have pretty robust relationships on the professional athletes and A-list celebrity entertainer side with agencies such as CAA, United Talent, Wasserman. And once a specific agent kind of finds out that you're such a potent force multiplier for their athlete, their recording artist, what have you, they tend to provide repeat customers for you. And it creates this like flywheel effect of a pipeline that generates referrals, so to speak. We also have pretty strong relationships with the director of orthopedics at UCLA, Dr. Josh Goldman, and his colleague, Christopher Jones, who's the LA Lakers team physician, and then Alex Weber over at USC. And so they provide some pretty steady referral sources for us. With those referral sources, if they're general population, so not a elite athlete or professional athlete, often we'll get referred a client and then they end up staying with us. If they're referred for rehab, for instance, they'll end up staying with us for performance optimization, health, and longevity, even after they've been discharged from the rehab side. And that kind of plays into the business model that we have built, incorporating those three verticals into one ecosystem. Because one of my biggest pet peeves, I think, coming up coming from professional sport and then coming up through my clinicals during my doctorate was watching the physical therapy profession kind of hang on to athletes who were healthy and ready to be discharged, but then naming it as like injury prevention and saying they were focusing on human performance when in fact they weren't necessarily qualified to do so. I know that's a little bit inflammatory to say it that way, but I think being blunt in this regard is pretty, we don't beat around the bush. And I think it's an objective way to go straight at the issue. And all that to say as well, there are physical therapists who hold other credentials in strength and conditioning and human performance who are more than qualified to do so. But I just wanted to create a business model and a comprehensive ecosystem in our practice that allowed for top tier performance across all of those domains, whether it's rehab, elite performance, or the objective data side of sports science testing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. And I think this isn't meant to be like a bash, but I sometimes get concerned about the sports residency programs. I think they're great in terms of like what they academically teach you, but I think and I'm probably going to get some hate mail for this, but I think some of the sort of areas that it maybe lacks is, if we're working with athletes and we're working in sport, we're trying to get somebody back to a higher level of function and performance. And the sports residency programs typically don't cover late stage rehab, or really what we should really be calling is just traditional strength and conditioning and athletic development. Right. So it's kind of, you can go down the academic route of doing a sports residency, and it's brilliant orthopedically, but I think it still misses that end bit, which is, do you actually understand athleticism? And if you don't, you can't fully return an athlete at that very late stage. So it has to be supplemented with something else. So it's great, but I think it needs something else alongside it for you to really understand the continuum of rehab. That's my that's the hill that I'm going to die on as someone that didn't do sports residency. But
likewise.
Yeah.
Likewise. But I do think as well, when you're making a statement like that, if you don't catch a little bit of flack for having a strongly held opinion, which knowing you also are able to didactically hold two opinions in hand at once and see the pros and cons of both sides. Like if you're not catching a little bit of flack, it means that you're not making statements worth a damn, really. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And we can censor that, cut that out, but
no,
that's just what I have to say.
Well, no, look, we're saying there's value in it. It's not to say don't do it. It's saying it's great, but there's something else you have to do alongside it to get the full, the full picture, I think.
100%.
Anyone that follows you on Instagram or after listening to this episode checks out Move Lad's Instagram is going to see that you've got one of the best toy chests I've seen for tech and tools in sport. Before we get into the questions that I really want to ask you, can you just tell us what is in the toolkit or what's in the toy box at your place? Because you've got some unbelievable tools that not even every pro sports team will have. So hit me with the shopping list that you guys have checked off over the years.
100%. So we have a lot of fun. We definitely like our toys. I think we have a pretty heavy hitting suite of sports science technologies and ways that we can gather and capture objective data and use that in an actionable way. First and foremost, we'll start in the biomechanics lab. We have a 3D motion capture system. Our old one was made by Seeming Reality Motion Systems. It's an 8-camera system. We're currently speccing out a new space right now. And so we're kind of going back and forth between Qualisys and Vicon. But when I say high-speed mocap, it's high-speed motion capture. So we have 8 cameras. They're filming from 8 different angles. And then that's run through a computer program that allows us to model kinetic and kinematic data when we add in the in-ground force plates. So we can essentially do applied physics with human movement, calculating joint torques based off of angles, lever arms, those types of things. That leads to the in-ground force plates. New space is going to have dual Burtec in-ground force plates, which we're really excited for. Might make a jump to Kistler at some point, but we'll leave that to all of the biomechanics nerds in the room to help us with, feedback on that. But we like both brands. It should be really great. In addition to our motion capture and in-ground plates, we run a HUMAC norm. So shout out Daniel Bodkin and Eric Mira. I think both of you will appreciate that. Both have been on this podcast before. Really appreciate all that you guys do. But we run our HUMAC, which is essentially a big dynamometer unit. It helps us test isometric strength as well as isokinetic strength. And then we can leverage it for training as well in an isokinetic context, which is super useful for a variety of use cases. After our dynamometer, we have a suite of mobile technologies provided by Vald primarily. So we have ForceDex Max, IMTP platform for those ForceDex, We're running a Nord board, and then we have a dynamo for just remote use, or if our HUMAC is being used and we need quick and dirty strength assessment, either tensiometer or isometric compression data with that. In terms of the cardiometabolic testing, we currently run 2 VO2 master units. It's a metabolic analysis unit. Essentially, it is a wireless version of a metabolic cart, like you would see with a Parbmedics or a Cosmed. It is a face mask with a wireless unit that reads respiratory gases. And so we're able to assess VO2 max as well as resting metabolic rate. It's really useful, and we'll kind of dive into that a little bit later on the pod today. And I think, Noraxon, how could I forget about them? So we have wireless EMG from Noraxon, allows us to read electrical impulses from muscles, both in amplitude and frequency, so we can take a look at motor unit sequencing within different movement patterns, and it gives us some valuable and actionable data on neuromotor coordination as well as muscle function from that neuromuscular and electrical potential standpoint. The last piece, which is really fun, we're actually working on getting a new HP Cosmos treadmill. It's outfitted with a force plate underneath the belt, so it gives us really useful data on gait in terms of like quantifying step length, ground contact time, peak ground reaction forces, and a plethora of other data. So that's a tool that we use pretty much daily and very useful for us in our toolkit.
Unbelievable. And next time I'm in LA, I want to come not just to like hang out, to be honest, and try and play around with all this stuff. So I'm just inviting
100%.
myself there. The big things that I wanted to talk to you today is kind of how you guys, how you do things, because it's more meaningful for the practitioners listening. Let's say kind of an athlete walks in for testing, void of injury context, let's say, just for this example. What does that kind of start to finish process look like when somebody comes to you or a team sends an athlete in for you?
100%. So it's a pretty easy 5-step process for us if we really distill it down to its component parts. And so the first part is just our intake and profiling. Like we sit down with the athlete. Usually we're able to send them some intake paperwork wirelessly before. If they're not able to fill it out or they choose not to, we'll hand them an iPad. They can take a seat in our main lounge area and take some time to fill it out. And then we'll come out and have a chat with them and just say, hey, let's get an idea of where you're coming from, what your goals with us are, get clarity and alignment on those elements, and then we can guide the rest of the assessment process from there. The second step is obviously our baseline testing. So based on the athlete's specific needs and goals, as well as their current status, we'll essentially design a testing battery around accomplishing those key goals after we've distilled those goals down into KPIs that we want to look at that will support that goal or goals. And then following the baseline testing, which integrates all of that suite of technologies that we just talked about, we'll go through a data analysis and review. So we integrate all the data together into an easily digestible report for the athlete. Excuse me, a little bit of word vomit there. We integrate it into an easily digestible report for the athlete. And then we'll prescribe a training plan for them to essentially say, hey, we have identified these key performance indicators essentially below threshold that are restricting us from reaching this goal or that need to be improved or optimized in order to reach this goal that you're shooting for. Here is how we are going to block out a plan addressing each one of these over a prescriptive period of time. And here's how we'll reassess to ensure that we're making progress towards those goals using those KPIs over this period of time. And then finally, we'll retest and iterate with them throughout the course of that process to make sure that when the day comes, we're going to achieve that goal for them, and then we move on from there. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, perfect. I guess you can kind of cherry pick the clinical context or the example if you want, and obviously case sensitive, but how do you go about selecting the test? You've obviously got a broad array of tools and toys, and you could test people in a number of ways. When you've got everything, how do you decide what test you're going to do?
100%. So depending on what the athlete is coming in with in terms of predisposing factors, medical history, and current goals, we'll review that information, and let's use an ACL post-op, for instance, or does that go too far off script because you were saying healthy athlete looking at
that's fine.
performance indicators?
No, that's great. No, it's good. You can cherry pick the example.
Okay, for sure. So ACL post-op, easily contextualizable example, pretty hot topic always in the rehab as well as the performance industries. So we have an ACL post-op. Let's say they're 12 months out. They've been cleared, but they're still having some issues with top end speed. They're a soccer player. Top end speed and change of direction still are problematic to them. They feel subjectively like they're not as fast or responsive as they typically were pre-surgery, right? And maybe their coaching staff or a parent or agent is saying, hey, we're seeing the same thing. Performance is degraded a little bit. What is the limiting factor here? What's going on? And how do we get them back to pre-injury levels or better, right? In that case, we would say, all right, we have a medical history that involves a significant surgical intervention for this athlete. We know that that creates, typically in the research, strength problems, which are persistent for a long time domain. And those strength issues and neuromotor coordination issues are going to impact movement quality. The additional side of that I would then look at is, okay, most return to sport for ACL programs focus on strength, symmetry, being the big one, power, symmetry, and then movement quality. Those are all great things. We're going to look at them in a high fidelity, high objective data fashion here and really quantify risk factors as well as key performance indicators across movement, strength, neuromotor coordination, and power domains. So we're dialing all of those in, but we also know that VO2 max values, someone's aerobic and anaerobic fitness also declines, both pre-surgery, in the time domain between injury and surgical date, but also in that 9-month to 12-month period of rehab happening, because we're obviously restricted in what types of activities and training volumes we can sustain, right? And so given the research on that, I would additionally conduct some cardiometabolic testing, probably consisting of a resting metabolic rate test to see what their current metabolic profile looks like, so that will augment their training and make sure that we are fueling them and being efficient with how we're adapting to the stimulus we give them. But additionally, do a VO2 max to say, okay, where do we stand with your aerobic and anaerobic capacities at this point? Is that engine piece potentially a limiting variable that has been persistent throughout the last 12 months that wasn't addressed by your previous rehab? And so in that way, we're able to quantitatively address strength, power, movement mechanics, and then their aerobic and anaerobic engine, which is a comprehensive look at how they're doing. And then neuromuscular coordination also plays into that movement piece, and we can use EMG if we need to address that as well. Obviously,
there's a ton of data points and Kinetic, Kinematic, Metabolic, etc. There's a lot of data that you can generate on an athlete. I've been around biomechanic testing, in particular of NBA athletes in the past, and I'm just really curious, having seen it firsthand in one way, I'm just really curious as to how, when you've got all those tools and you've got all that data, how do you then personally kind of convert that data and create meaningful analysis, but then also maybe give some prescriptive or actionable suggestions for what the athlete does or what the coach or physio, whoever it is, does with that athlete?
100%. So I think that there's a variety of factors that influence that process. The first of which being, is the athlete coming to us just for diagnostics? And then we're going to be giving actionable information and essentially an infrastructure of here's the diagnostic renderings and simply laying out the key areas that need to be focused on and addressed, as well as a series of recommendations for whatever professional is going to be taking over care for that athlete, to help guide their process in getting that athlete back to where they need them to be. That is one of the contexts that we provide this in. And if that's the case, then it is distilling down the data to nice, simple categories for the athlete, the agent and coach, and the referred to professional to understand, and then bucketing that into a prescriptive plan and making that as intensive and understandable for that individual as will hold value, because everybody understands data in a different way. Everybody communicates a little bit differently. Different teams, different strength coaches, different organizations prefer data presentation in a variety of ways. And I think that's something that's made us pretty potent, is really meeting our clientele where they're at, and having a wide variety of experience across different domains of practice, whether that's tactical, special operations communities, law enforcement, EMS, professional athletics, NBA, NFL, NHL, what have you. And then you're 45-year-old Manhattan Beach mom who just has knee pain when she does Pilates. All of these are a variety of different communication styles, and for us to adequately convey the information that we need to in a meaningful way that drives actionable outcomes, you have to meet the client where they're at. And so I think one principle that really rings true with us is clarity and simplicity. When we have a lot of data inputs, it's about distilling out the most valuable parts of that information for them and showing them, this is why you're here. These are the key elements that we have identified that we need to work on. Here's how we're going to fix your problem. And that's what it boils down to at the end of the day. And then providing whatever type of insight and prescriptive planning, and delivering that in a way that they're going to receive well and be able to put feet on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. I think it's always, I said the word packaging a lot earlier, but I just always find it interesting to see how people package it, because we can talk about sort of like the nitty-gritty details of data or clinical insights, but you've ultimately, it's the kind of so what factor of biomechanic report at the end of the day.
Right. Well, and I think too, just to piggyback on that, because I feel like I was speaking a lot in generalities about our framework of how we approach it. One of the most successful things that we've developed that I've found works across a variety of communication styles and contexts is our reports. I'm a very visual learner, and I find that concepts with a nice visual representation component paired with a short, succinct description usually carry a lot of weight, because especially when people walk in and they see all of the ring lights and the cameras and all of the technology, they're stepping into Rocky with Ivan Drago, right? Like, yeah. We're in this performance lab, and what are we doing here? It's all intricate. If we can easily convey, like for our running or biomechanics reports, for instance, we'll have still shots of their motion capture and their force data, piggybacked with a video of them doing the movement. And the still shots that sit next to the video file are in an interactive PDF, so they can just flip book through it. And when they flip to a page, they'll see a video of them doing the movement, and then they'll have the highlighted frames where we are identifying key, let's say, biomechanical movement points of reference for them. Like, this is something that needs to be addressed. And then as we progress through the report, we have sections. So we'll start with biomechanics, then we'll move on to like the instrumented treadmill data. Do they have a step length asymmetry, peak force asymmetry? We'll move on to strength. Are there strength deficits, or are they above the normative value that they need to be? And then we'll bring it all home by having a clinical assessment page, which essentially outlines the key points from each one of those sections: biomechanical, strength, movement coordination, what have you, whatever we tested. And then the following slide is a short summary statement on the main points that were identified from each one of those sections that they need to work on, with a nice little graphic representation of like a skeleton avatar that has their muscle weakness points or the high risk joint torques and areas they need to work on. So it's very segmental, visually pleasing, and it's a quick reference guide that distills down complex data into easily digestible concepts for them.
Nice. No, very good. How do you guys, it might be a bit of a segue point, but how do you guys kind of pull in clinical research? I know you're involved in sort of private research, I guess, but how do you kind of pull clinical research into what you do? And I guess if I could just tag in a second part to this question, do you guys then generate like your own norms? Like, do you have your own sort of in-house normative data that you can pull upon from, getting a high volume of certain types of athletes?
So I'd say a little bit of both with that. Kind of going back to what I said earlier when I was jokingly, plugging Eric, Daniel, like having you in my network, I'm very humbled and privileged to have a lot of very strong clinical reasoning individuals around me, and clinical heavy hitters around me. I regularly try to stay up on literature reviews and research. ChatGPT has been a huge proponent of force multiplier for that process with me, just because I can give it prompts to regularly review journals that I hold memberships to, and ask it to highlight key terms and help pull those for me so that I can review them at a regular basis. We are working on like a plugin right now that will update our report norms automatically. It's not rolled out or finished yet, but essentially creating an LLM that will scrape current research for us and essentially give us a quick summary of this, and then say, would you consider updating these normative values, let's say for your isokinetic quad strength at X degrees per second for this subset of the population, whatever. But in terms of how we incorporate research, we're currently using, I'd say, a large body of research validated norms, particularly with our strength testing, our movement analysis testing, that come from both in-house literature review by myself and my staff, as well as just direct network connections that allow us to have access to unpublished research, if that makes sense, like research that's in process but looking really solid. And then we combine that with our clinical expertise and our years of experience, and that allows us to critically think on top of, our robust research validated normative values that we're pulling from. Also, shameless plug to Vald. Absolutely love the normative values. Keep them coming.
Sponsor of the show, so go ahead. Yeah.
Yep, love contributing to that, and hopefully we're giving you guys some good data, so keep up the great work. Makes our lives a lot easier. But yeah, I hope that sufficiently addresses your question. If not, I can elaborate.
Yeah, no, 100%. I guess, is there anything you think you're missing product-wise? I'm just really curious as to this. Like, if you win the Powerball, what do you buy then? You've got a lot of the good toys, so I'm just wondering, like, what do you think's missing? If anything's missing, that's if.
Of course, there's two places that I would love to create like a Frankenstein lab based off of. The first is Nike Sports Research Lab out in Portland. Shameless shout out to them. Their architecture team, build team, their biomechanics lead, like everybody did such an incredible job with that. If you've been to the new LeBron Center, the basketball court there is absolutely insane. In terms of like force plate analytics underneath the entire floor. They've got, laser sensors hovering right above the floor, so we can look at like takeoff time, contact time, all of these fun things, and then full 3D motion capture around the court, as well as hoop specific mocap tracking for shot tracking, arc analysis, all of that fun stuff. That would be like Candyland to have a basketball court or a versatile court setup that could be used for basketball, volleyball, field hockey, all of the fun things, or even like tactical movement analysis. The price point is quite cost prohibitive. So that would be the first location that I would want to pull into a new space for us. The square footage would be a limiting factor as well. But then the second would be Aspetar. Their lab setup is absolutely beautiful, and their research team does an incredible job. The facilities, square footage, and capabilities that they have in there. If I could marry Aspetar with Nike Sports Research Lab, that would be my dream scenario. And I think the other thing to highlight is Nike also has barometric pressure controlled, temperature controlled, and humidity controlled chambers, which have HP Cosmos and Watt Bikes in them, so that you can run VO2 max and cardiometabolic, even RMR testing at different barometric pressure conditions and temperature humidity conditions, which for like our tactical operators and our F1 driver and even pit crew clientele would be huge. So I think that would be another Candyland component that we don't currently have and is quite cost prohibitive to us at this time.
I think you start to become part physical therapist, biomechanist, part Bond villain when you get to that level of tools. So
yeah, 100%,
and just incredibly rich to buy them all as well. So I've got another question on testing that I really want to bug you with while I've got your attention. And a lot of what we've spoken about today is kind of referenced kinetic and kinematic testing, which is always, and as it kind of should be, it's always the hot topic and the thing that most of our listeners and most practitioners are more familiar with. Something that I feel like when I was coming up and cutting my teeth as a strength coach was bigger was metabolic testing or conditioning testing. Doesn't get spoken about as much anymore. Dan House does a really good job, just to mention him. He does a really good job with like education on energy system development, but it just seems to be a topic that we're not talking about enough, and I'm sure you share that opinion. But can you talk us through, or talk me through, how you go about testing athlete fitness and conditioning? Because I know that you've got the VO2 Master.
Of course. So one of the components that I really wanted to add early on when we launched Move Lab, and a shameless plug to one of my former colleagues, Adam Barrick, who's currently doing his PhD with Chris Powers right now. Adam and I discussed bringing in VO2 max testing capabilities in-house. I think year 2 that we were building Move Lab, and both of us felt pretty strongly about the value that it could add, both from just a commercial standpoint, as Peter Attia's book was taking off, more traction was growing in the general public for the value that VO2 max testing has for predicting longevity, as well as guiding training at a higher fidelity with personalized heart rate zones and what have you. But also I started digging into a little bit more the injury impact side. And that was due to my relationship with Francesco Della Vella. He's with Kinetic, actually one of the founding members, or the son of the founding member. And he lectures at the Kinetic conference, outstanding colleague and friend of mine. And he brought my attention to a paper that was going to be published when he was here with me in 2018. He stayed with Chris and I at our lab and essentially shadowed us for a year and brought back a lot of the principles to Kinetic in Italy. But he and I spent a lot of time discussing as we were collecting data and teaching, and he was shadowing with us. And we started talking about the impact of ACL reconstructive surgery on elite soccer players, specifically on their cardiometabolic health. And in prep for this pod, I would like to come with data because that's what we do. And so just looking at the data from a few large studies on elite soccer players at 6 months post-op, because most FIFA clubs test VO2 max as part of their season testing for like baseline, in-season, and post-season. There's a large body of VO2 max and metabolic health data on these players. And so when someone gets injured, it's very easy then to say, okay, we have their baseline value. Let's run a retrospective analysis and take a look at how those values change over time, right? And essentially looking at how in professional soccer, VO2 max can be around 20% lower pre-op in that, like I said, in that period between injury and surgery, and then 15% lower at 6 months post-op ACLR. And there's no large-scale robust study on it right now, but it is in process, talking about the logical link, or essentially validating the very logical link between metabolic conditioning and movement quality. Because as fatigue increases, neuromuscular coordination subsequently decreases, and then our injury risk increases, right? And so if we look at that, it seems like a very robust correlation to me. Like I said, more papers to come, but it was something that was really, pronounced to us, and I'm glad that we brought that suite of services in-house. We've since developed a relationship with VO2 Master, and it's been very fruitful in terms of just developing our capabilities and our reach, because VO2 Master is portable. We're able to take it to athletes when they need testing, rather than having to lug around a metabolic cart, which is quite cumbersome and expensive. And in addition, it allows us to have our athletes train with the unit on, or if they purchase a unit of their own, they can stream the data right to the VO2 Master Cloud, which we can then access from anywhere in the world, and help them not only test remotely, but train remotely with a high degree of accuracy. Because if we're looking at traditional heart rate zone training, you can get your personalized heart rate zones from a VO2 max test, which is great. But we also know that those zones shift up and down and are a fluid organism depending on your sleep quality, your recovery, your nutrition, your hydration status, day to day, right? And so having an added layer of fidelity in the data that you're using to guide your training through adding respiratory gas analysis in real time really allows us to target the accurate zone with a high degree of detail and accuracy. So it allows us to have athletes, particularly who are traveling, ensure that they're hitting their correct training targets heart rate wise, and really getting the adaptations that they're looking to drive home.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like a lot of the testing that we over-focus on, or have to focus on as well, obviously, the kinetic and kinematic stuff, like very often, especially the kinetic stuff, it feels like the output of the athletic system versus, and I'm sure sports scientists could philosophically argue this, but for me, the energy system development and cardiometabolic stuff is an input that has an impact on the output of how you play, your GPS data, your outputs when you force test, all of it. So I think sometimes we don't look at what I'm just going to, for slang and ease of language, say as an input to the system, and we just look at the outputs. So
I think one little caveat as well, not to not to interject too quickly here, but one other value add piece that I found really interesting was with a lot of our professional athletes, particularly in hockey, and our power sport athletes, like very gritty starting lineup individuals, triathletes being another one with that. You have this mental construct that if you're not feeling the effect of training, it's not having the desired outcome. And you start to see some of these athletes, particularly Ironmen, will start to plateau in their training. And we've gotten a decent amount of them coming through, serial marathoners turned Ironmen. Now they're like, okay, well, my heart rate at a certain split just continues to rise, and I'm bonking early, and it's happening consistently. It's been going on for 3-4 months, and I can't explain what's happening. Like, my sleep is dialed in, my nutrition's dialed in. But when we look at their training peaks, we look at their data, we start to talk through their training methodology with them if they're not tracking their data, which that's very rare for someone at that achievement level to not. We find that they're often running way too hot and really overemphasizing the anaerobic component of their training. And you're facilitating a burnout effect and not getting a training benefit or adaptation at that point. And I think what the VO2 Master, and not even VO2 Master, what VO2 Max and cardiometabolic testing has allowed us to do is it gives us a very razor's edge, accurate way to give them instant feedback and show them, look at your ventilatory thresholds. Let's look at your heart rate ranges in these, at certain speeds.
Yeah.
And let's look at your VO2 max. And now we can clearly pinpoint, you do not have an aerobic base that's built up. You're running way too hot in your training. You're overcooking yourself. This is why you're plateauing, and easily connect those dots for them. And it makes the transition to a mode of training that can be a bit difficult or create cognitive dissonance for that type of athlete much more smooth. Because if they're thinking, I'm not feeling this, so it's therefore not having an effect, and I'm training 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, so how can I don't want to waste training hours. Why would I ride a bike erg if I can have a conversation? This is doing nothing. And it's like, actually it is. The data shows you that it is, and now we can reassess at even shorter intervals, or just tell you, hey, within 4 to 5 weeks, you're going to see the speed on your biker go up and your heart rate's going to be at the same BPM.
Yeah.
Because your cardiovascular system's adapting, and therefore you're generating more wattage at the same amount of effort cardiovascularly. So it's a very easy way for us to communicate and paint a clear picture for the athlete, which then generates rapport and creates buy-in to a prescribed training program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. It's kind of like, velocity-based training for cardio at the end of the day, isn't it? Like we can, we're all very happy of using a VBT sensor of some kind to look at bar speed and get the minimal effective dose under a barbell and not grind out excessive volume. It's the same thing for kind of energy system development, as a proxy.
100%.
I'm aware of time, and I don't want to steal too much of yours, and you've always got interesting stuff going on. Where can people follow you, firstly? And then is there anything you can give us a preview of that you've got coming up, any good projects?
Of course. So if you guys want to give us a follow, our Instagram is probably the easiest. It's just at MoveLabLA, all one word. We would love to lock down MoveLab as a domain name for that on Instagram or username, but it's currently taken. But we are working on that, so I'll update you if that happens between when this is recorded and when we launch. But that would be the easiest, or just www.movelabla.com for our website. Feel free to give us a shout on there. There is our concierge email there. They'll forward any emails to me. My personal is just at RiepeDPT. I am private, so if I don't follow you back or accept you, I apologize. I'm really busy. I don't get on social that often, if I'm being honest. So feel free to give us a follow there. In terms of things coming up, I alluded to it earlier, but we are in the process of building out our new facility. So we'll keep you guys posted on that. There will be a large media dump when we do our private launch party. Andy, you know that you're already invited, and probably a few of you guys listening right now. So just keep an eye out for that. And in the interim, huge congrats to Dylan Dahlquist, my good friend and colleague, who just locked up a position at Oakley with their sports science as their sports science lead. We will probably be rolling out something with them pretty soon as well. But other than that, just keep an eye on the Mindful Endurance Program race team. We sponsor them for Ironman Tri, and we just kicked off their preseason testing, so they're going to do great this season. Feel free to give them a follow on social if you like, and track with us during the race. We'll be making some appearances and doing some follow-up testing with them. But that's about it.
Cool. Well, mate, it's always good to chat to you, and finally we actually recorded a conversation to turn into a podcast. So really good to chat to you today, mate, and thank you for coming on.
Likewise. Appreciate you, Andy. Have a good one. Thanks.